Good evening. Thank you all for being here, to the Y for having us to discuss Jake's latest novel, All the Demons Are Here. I'm going to glow on Jake for a second, even though he might not want me to. Jake is one of the sharpest observers of the evolution of media who's working in the business today. He's one of the sharpest political reporters and observers working today. The book is an absolute page-turner. I got through it in 2 sittings. And I would think, even if I wasn't a micro-targeted audience, as a former tabloid reporter, reading about a tabloid reporter discovering and struggling with some of the practices used in tabloid journalism, I would have enjoyed it regardless. The book has a DeLillo-like sensibility, grounded in real-life events, real-life characters and places, Ronald Reagan, Roy Cohn at Studio 54, and so forth. So let's dig in.
Thank you so much. Can I just say, first of all, thank you to the 92nd Street Y. Thank you to Sue. Thank you to the amazing Maggie Haberman, who... she's just the best, and it's just so fun to have her doing this for me. She doesn't get paid or anything. She's just doing it to be nice.
I get to be at the 92nd Street Y, and I get to be with Jake. It works out.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me do this. So first off, I have to ask about something I've been wondering about for the last couple of years. You host 2 shows.
Yeah, I co-host one of them, but yeah.
Oh, okay, well then it doesn't count. You have an active social media presence, although less than you used to.
I think it's just that there are more social media platforms that I'm on that you're not.
Fair.
So you don't know what I'm saying on Blue Sky.
You're spread out across different entities now.
Yeah. Oh, a couple Blue Sky skeeters. All right.
Interesting. How on earth have you found the time to write 3 novels in the last 4 years?
So I will say that, first of all, you are just as nuts as I am, so I can't really fully say that you don't understand.
PolitiFact rules true.
I will pick up a New York Times and you will have 5 bylines on the front page. So you are not one to talk. But I think that, I am obviously a very driven person, perhaps in an unhealthy way, but I'm a very driven person. And B, I am pretty good at allotting time. So if I'm in a writing project, I have rules about every day I'll write 15 minutes at least, and just finding time to do that sort of thing. I'm not particularly good at vegging. It's also helpful that, because I have 2 teenagers, I do not control the remote control in my TV room, so I don't get to watch TV anyway.
That's good.
So I follow a pretty vigorous schedule. But I'm also I get bored a lot.
Really?
And so, yeah, I do get bored a lot. I don't think it's ADHD, but I do find myself looking for things to do.
Okay.
And I have
So you churned out 3 novels as a thing to do.
Kind of. And there are a couple college friends of mine who are here tonight, Daryl and David. And I don't know if I was like that back then, because I feel like I spent a lot of time vegging with them, but I definitely spent less time vegging than they did.
Interesting. We'll give them a chance to tell us in the question and answer period if that's true.
We'll have a point for rebuttals later.
Before we get into a deep dive about the plot, this book has a number of different threads. It's Washington, D.C. in the post-Nixon era, tabloidization of the U.S. media, the phenomenon of being famous simply for being famous, and demagoguery and its power over people. But ultimately, this book is about power and how it is used and applied similarly across a bunch of different contexts. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So you're right. That's one of the subtexts of the book is about the use and abuse of power. The basic plots for you to so anybody who read the previous 2 books, The Hellfire Club and The Devil May Dance, know that the main characters are Congressman Charlie Martyr and his zoologist wife Margaret Martyr. This book has Charlie and Margaret in it, but it is written by their kids, Lucy, who's now a 22-year-old journalist, and Ike, who is a 20-year-old AWOL Marine. And they have 2 different adventures that intersect at the beginning, the middle, and then at the end. And Charlie and Margaret are in the book too, but it's their stories. And each chapter alternates as in a first-person narrative, one chapter written by Lucy, the next chapter written by Ike. Lucy's story is about journalism and tabloid journalism, because 1977, when this book takes place, is a wild, crazy time. I was only 8, so to anybody out there who was living this as an adult, man, I don't know what you guys were thinking. That was a really wild time, not just the disco, but just the mistrust of government and the Son of Sam murders, the New York City blackout, UFO sightings, cults, all of the wild things going on. So Lucy wants to be Woodward and Bernstein, who are in the book as characters, and I gave them early copies just in case.
I was going to ask you.
I was just in case they wanted to veto anything. Because they are kind of like peacocks at the beginning when they're walking around the Senate dining room.
It was an interesting portrayal. You have them at the beginning.
I do
and then
refer
later.
to Carl's hair as feathered like Farrah Fawcett's. Hey, but I looked at pictures, man. The fact check true.
I didn't think it was inappropriate or wrong.
But they are Lucy's heroes, Woodward and Bernstein, 1977. But she gets veered off course because she starts working for a new fictional tabloid that is based on the very non-fictional Rupert Murdoch. And Murdoch's doppelganger in the book is a guy named Max Lyon. He's a British media magnate in the United States to start a tabloid and begin to build a media empire in the United States. And Lucy's story has to do with what stories get told in journalism and how do they get told. And it's very much an exploration of the tabloidization of American media and how we ended up where we are today, although the book is firmly set in 1977. What happens when you care more about selling newspapers than you do about delivering accurate information to people? And that's something we've seen the results of in recent lawsuit settlements and the like. Ike's story is about demagoguery. Ike is AWOL from the Marines after a mishap in Lebanon that is, again, fictitious. And he ends up on the pit crew of Evel Knievel, who in 1977 is this huge figure in American popular culture life. He is a showman, he's a salesman, he's a huckster. He has a quintessentially American quality that we saw with P.T. Barnum and we've seen with other people, including our last president, Donald Trump, who had an ability to get attention, get news attention, get media attention, get supporters, say whatever he wanted to say, and just keep getting stronger and more popular because of it. And the story of Evel Knievel and Ike is the story of why do people who have legitimate grievances and problems follow demagogues? Like, what is it about the quality of the demagogues and the people who have legitimate grievances? Because there's a mob that follows Evel Knievel on this journey. I don't want to I don't want to spoil it for you, and that's an exploration of why this happens. I'm not talking about Swifties and Taylor Swift. I want to make sure that people understand.
Thank God.
I'm not criticizing teenage girls following Taylor Swift.
Or middle-aged women.
Or middle-aged women.
Hello.
And when they rise up against middle-aged men to kill us at Taylor's orders, please remember that I am on your side. But I am talking about mobs and groups that have grievances and choose to follow people who have charisma but not really a lot of sincerity when it comes to solving their problems. And so it's two contemporary stories told from the perspective of 1977. I
want to come back to Ike and Lucy in a little bit and what they tell us about our culture, but why the 1970s? In the previous books, you very specifically set the martyrs in a place and time. Why specifically? You talked about what a wild time 1977 in particular was, and it was. It's also the year that Murdoch began running in earnest the New York Post.
Yep.
And so, which I only know because that's the year my father quit the New York Post. But
Clyde?
That would be my father. Talk us through a little bit about the mistrust of government that you were talking about, this strain that we have seen carry through, and particularly there's a bit that you flick at. This is the post-Nixon era, D.C.
And post-Vietnam War era.
And post-Vietnam War era that primarily takes place in D.C., but it also takes place in Montana, this book. There you talk about, in brief, in the beginning, or the characters talk about, a group of House Republicans who believed Nixon was set up and who believed this was not real, what had happened with Watergate and his departure. Talk a bit about that as a historical strain.
So with those guys I just made up. because I'm from.
As I said, historical strength.
Right. Yeah. That particular group of Pennsylvania House Republicans, Charlie, who is now a senator, he was a congressman in the first two books. He's now a senator. He kind of replaces Jacob Javits. So if you had any fondness for Jacob Javits, he does not exist in this universe, and I apologize for that. But Charlie
Martyr is a good replacement.
Charlie's there, and but there are people that we've all pretend like I think we kind of memory hold the idea that like Nixon, who was obviously a disgrace and a criminal, I think we've as a society have decided like, oh, well, he did that, and then he was impeached and he resigned and he was ousted, and that was the end of that. When the truth of the matter is much more complicated. And when I dove into 1977, I was fascinated to learn how complicated it was. First of all, there were very few Republicans who were willing to go out on a limb until they absolutely had to. Charlie, fictitiously, is one of them. Yes. One who's not fictitious. In the book, Charlie is one of two House Republicans to vote to impeach Nixon on the House Judiciary Committee.
Larry Hogan Sr. is the other, correct?
The other one was Larry Hogan Sr.
Senior, yeah.
Yeah, Larry Hogan Sr.,
Yeah.
the father of the governor of Maryland. And Larry Hogan Sr., and this I learned while researching this book, you would think he would be a hero, so brave, so courageous. He was right. All the others were wrong. Larry Hogan Sr. ran for statewide office, I think governor, and he lost in the primary because the Republicans were mad at him. This is like 1976. This is like after Nixon was long gone. The Republicans were mad at him for going against Nixon. And Larry Hogan's, that was the end of Larry Hogan Sr.'s political career. Which is, by the way, every time I interview Larry Hogan Jr., the former governor, I talk to him about his dad.
Really?
Yeah, because his dad was his hero. There are very few of us who can say that about our dads or our moms, that they are our hero. His dad was his hero, and his dad got screwed. Right. His dad got a bum deal. Like he's in the history books, but that doesn't mean anything when you're scraping by and trying to get a job. So in any case, it was just this idea of the revisionism of it all that I wanted to touch on. Charlie is a senator. He's sitting in the Senate dining room and watching all these Senate Republicans pretend that they were firmly, against Nixon from the beginning. And then there's this fight that he has with his wife, who's more liberal, and his daughter, who's a journalist, about whether Howard Baker was the senator who said, what did the president know and when did he know it? And Charlie is citing this as an example of how brave the Republican Party is. Howard Baker, the Senate minority leader, isn't this great? And his wife, Margaret, and his daughter, Lucy, are saying, that's not, when he said, what did the president know and when did he know it? He was trying to protect the president. He was trying to put it off on AIDS. This is actually like a real thing, as you know, where there's this whole revisionism about how brave Howard Baker was, when actually a lot of people think he was just like, well, what did the president know and when did he know it? Because I don't think he knew anything bad until it was too late to act.
You have a little bit of a flick, too, at politicians who revise their own histories with journalists in the scene with Woodward and Bernstein.
Yeah.
Where, there's a reference to a story that they were told, and, I have no doubt I think it's Charlie Martyr who says it, I have no doubt that's the story you were told, I'm just not sure it was true.
Right. Well, this is a real story that Woodward and Bernstein tell, and in fact, I just took the transcript from my show from Bernstein telling it and put it into the book. I footnoted everything at the end, don't worry.
It's true.
But it's a story about this, it's like Barry Goldwater telling them how, how brave he was with Nixon towards the end, where Nixon comes to him and is, just like, wow, if there's a vote, how's it going to go? And he goes, how many votes am I going to get? And Barry Goldwater, I'll tell you, Mr. President, you have 3 or 4 and mine ain't one of them. And it's just like, okay. All right. Do we really think that that's what happened? You really think Barry Goldwater said that to the President of the United States? I know it makes for good theater and it makes for a good story from a raconteur such as Carl Bernstein, but Charlie expresses skepticism when Bernstein tells him the story.
Let me get back to Lucy for a second. she's clearly disillusioned. I have to say that a lot of what she experiences in this book, as you read it, is very familiar to those of us who have worked in tabloids. And
also, I'm sure very familiar to young woman journalists because she's treated like crap at the first place where she works, the Washington Star, and all her scoops are given to male reporters for their bylines and doesn't get any credit for it.
And there were not a ton of female journalists in those days who stood out in the first place. So this was, people were vying for slots. But you track her disillusionment really carefully. I want to ask you two questions about it. One is, what experience were you basing that on in terms of your research with her? Was there anyone you spoke to who has described it this way, or is this just your sort of sense of what working in that industry was like, what working for a British tabloid or a British-based tabloid in the US was like?
I mean, I have to deal with the tabloids all the time because they write about us, and Fox is essentially a tabloid.
It's different now.
TV organization, but no, I mean, I just, I see it from the outside, and it looks pretty awful, and I just, kind of made it up, but for the story, but it's not. Look, anyone who's been a journalist for any amount of time has come to places where you can see why somebody of less integrity would take a different route.
Right.
I don't have this story, but if I do this, I do have the story.
And she's not somebody of less integrity. She's somebody who's deeply uncomfortable with what she's in, but she does get seduced by the world she's in.
Because she goes from being completely unrecognized, taken for granted, the editor doesn't even know her name at the Washington Star, to this new tabloid that wants her to be their star reporter and immediately assigns her to cover this murder in Rock Creek Park, and then all of a sudden she's their star reporter on this serial killer beat, and of course she loves the attention. She's 22 and she's, on the cover of a tabloid of a brand new, and also falling in love with the oldest son of the magnate.
Yes, that's a side product in the book. She falls into a situation where her reporting has pretty deleterious consequences. And I'm hoping you can talk a bit about how much, in general, journalists, just getting away from the book for a second, but getting into our industry, how much should journalists think about the consequences of what we do as we are trying to obtain the best accurate version of the truth?
Well, there's a difference between what we do as we're trying to attain it.
Yep.
And what we do when we actually put it out there.
That's right.
Those are two different things. Because I don't think, everybody in every business, in every walk of life, pretends to know more than they know when having a discussion or a negotiation.
And that's a theme throughout the book, too.
And that's something that Lucy does, and it's something that a lot of journalists do, and sometimes first of all, I will say, Maggie knows more than anybody in the Trump White House, so it's not an example of Maggie. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of journalists, I'm not saying lie, but people act as though they have more information than they do so as to get more information revealed. That is a standard practice, I think, in all sorts of industries. Now, there is a difference between suggesting and lying, of course. And there's also a difference between what Lucy doesn't write anything
that she thinks is untrue.
Thinks is untrue. Right. What happens is the editors get their hands on it and they try to goose it for newsstand sales and subscriptions. And I didn't have to imagine that at all. I see that every day. We were just talking about something that I said on a podcast that now all these media and other websites are turning into something as if I had criticized somebody that I hadn't. And it's just, you just see it all the time because this tabloid DNA is now just with us. Whether you call it clickbait or a ploy for ratings or sweeps week or whatever. And Max Lyon, who is the editor of the Washington Sentinel, the Rupert Murdoch stand-in, he's somebody who, I read a lot about Murdoch to try to get inside his head because I didn't want Max Lyon to be like a mustache, twirling caricature of a villain. I wanted him to be like real and living and breathing. And his argument that journalism in 1977, he knows no other industry that is so sure about giving the consumer what they do not want, was a widely expressed sentiment at the time.
Are we sure the consumer didn't want it, though? That was one of my questions. Was this tapping into something that was always there, or was this basically retraining readers and ultimately viewers later on?
No, I think you're right. That was just Murdoch / Max's perspective of it. But yeah, no, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
I definitely don't buy it. Look, I think that there are ways that media can make things more engrossing, direct, interesting, whatever. But that's not the same thing as lying. And I don't want to spoil the book for people who are here, so I assume they're going to read the book if they haven't already. And
read the book.
And I will say, so what happens is when Lucy is investigating this serial killer, her editors put things in her copy to make people in Washington, D.C. scared, and to make people in Washington, D.C. more suspicious of people that they shouldn't necessarily be suspicious of. And it ends up having a horrible consequence. And I'll just say, we see that all the time happening today. I remember after the Boston Marathon bombing, the New York Post put on the cover a picture of two people and suggested that these two were the bombers. And they were not. They just happened to be not white people in Boston who had backpacks. And the Post had to pay a settlement to these two individuals. And you go on from there all the way to the Dominion lawsuit or whatever, and it's just, yes. Or honestly, what happened January 6th? Donald Trump was the one sharing the lies, and people that Algonquin club roundtable he had around him, like Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn, they were certainly feeding the lies. But Fox and Newsmax and these talk about not thinking about the consequences of what you were doing. To Maggie's credit, so I remember, and I've told this story publicly before with her permission, so I'm not telling tales out of school. December 18th was 2020 was that insane meeting where Donald Trump was being told, you've probably heard about it on the January 6th hearings, or we've talked about it more recently on CNN and other places because the special counsel Jack Smith is looking into it. That was the insane meeting with Sidney Powell and all these people, where basically Trump is being told, declare martial law, seize the voting machines, appoint Sidney Powell special counsel to look into all the voter fraud, et cetera. And I talked to Maggie, maybe the next day.
I think it was that day.
It was that day?
Yeah, it was that day.
And she didn't, your story came out a day or two later. It was
My story came out the next day.
Okay.
Around 1 p.m.
So before...
Sorry. It was a memorable time, guys.
So, but my point is, before the story broke, so I knew what she was upset about, but after she had learned about this meeting, I talked to her, and she was chilled in a way that I'd never heard her sound before. And my point is just the lies and the recklessness with which people like Sidney Powell and people like Maria Bartiromo and whatever, and everybody in between share lies has disastrous consequences, potentially, always. And we saw it on January 6th. And people died as a result of that. And so that is something that's very much in my head when I do my journalism, and also when I was writing this book.
It's a good departure point to talk about the other protagonist of the book, Ike. And his concerns. Although I do want to ask you one question. How did you so effectively go back and forth between two voices? They come off as just incredibly two distinctive people.
Thank you so much. So I will say, first of all, I worked really hard to do that.
It's a good answer.
I had a great woman named Christina Kovac who looked at my first draft, and she was so good at helping me make Lucy a living, breathing 22-year-old woman, just with references to cute boots, things that would never occur to me.
I did wonder about some of the feminizing of the
cute
character.
Boots was her, and I've never been in love with a man with dreamy eyes and all that stuff. So I could try, but she definitely helped. But also just I really leaned into Lucy as one side of me and Ike as another side of me. And Lucy was the reporter side of me, and that's why her chapters have footnotes, why she has an annoying habit of correcting everybody when they misuse the word ironic.
That was a great bit.
Or misquote Shakespeare or Robert Frost. And whereas Ike is more of the cynic / skeptic in me, he is also just supposed to be a stand-in for the United States, not knowing what to believe, believing that at this point, 1977, nothing he's been told is on the level. His dad is a World War II hero. He's named after President Eisenhower, and like here is Nixon and Vietnam and Watergate and also an incident that happens at his high school and just like nothing. He doesn't think he can believe in anything, and so I just leaned into those, and I made Ike curse more and be more into Elvis Presley and music and pop culture, and Lucy much more driven and use bigger words and be annoying about facts, and it worked, I guess. I hope.
I thought it worked very well. To stay on the theme of disillusionment, so much of this book, as you say, is about disillusionment in that period of time. Ike in particular discovers disillusionment for himself and for friends or associates with the military. Talk a bit about that, especially given how much reporting you have done on the military. Talk a bit about that.
So I cover the military and veterans issues a lot. It's mattered to me quite a bit since I wrote this book about Afghanistan called The Outpost that came out in 2012. And it's just, I was right. My grandfather fought in World War II. He lost his brother in World War II with the Air Force. And but that was, nobody in my family thought Uncle Edwin gave his life for naught. He fought in World War II. He was shot down by the Luftwaffe. I mean, like, it was noble what he did. And just having covered Afghanistan, having covered Iraq, and just and then taken what I've learned from that, and also just my questions about the flippancy with which this country has historically sent young men and women to carry out these expeditions, it makes me distressed quite often. And which is not to say I oppose use of force or anything, but it's just something that if you're going to build, for instance, the big lesson of the outpost for me was like, if you're going to build an outpost, build it in a place where the men and women there are safe, and where if it doesn't make any sense to have the outpost there anymore, you can get rid of it and leave immediately. And just basic comments, and don't put it at the bottom of 3 steep hills also. That's a good point. So I just put Ike in that world of governments lie, and governments lie about everything. And he has just gotten back from this ill-fated mission in Lebanon, and that's a fictitious mission, but certainly a precursor to a lot of real, actual disastrous missions of U.S. Marines in Lebanon, as we all know, in the late 70s and especially in the early 80s. And I just wanted his distress to be that of not just me and not just the character of Ike, but all of us, because I'm sure we all feel this way. We don't know who to trust when it comes to the government and in the military. We want to believe in the United States. We were all raised believing, and we saved the world from Nazis. We saved the world from tyranny. And then you turn around, and what are we doing? And that's what I wanted Ike. I wanted Ike to be us, not just in 1977, but also now, because we don't know what to believe and what to trust. I mean, we have an idea of who not to believe and who not to trust. But that's easy. But what do we believe? And like, what is a good use of military force? When should we send people in?
One of the people in whom I wouldn't say believes, but follows, is Evel Knievel, about whom I learned more than I ever knew.
Me too.
From reading this book. Yeah. So
I knew nothing about Evel Knievel.
Why did you end up picking him as a character?
So I was at a fishing lodge in Idaho 2 years ago, and I was fishing with a friend of mine who owns the lodge, and he loves Evel Knievel, and there's Evel Knievel stuff all over the lodge, and I was just like, why? And at this point, I knew that I was going to set the book in the 70s, and I was just kind of like trying to figure out hooks and ideas, and I said, well, why? I didn't know anything about Evel Knievel. I was 8 in 1977, so I should have. But somehow it passed me by. I don't know why. Like I was reading comic books and I was watching the Philadelphia Phillies, and I don't know. I have friends who loved Evel Knievel and had that little action figure. And
even as kids, they loved Evel Knievel?
Oh, yeah. No, he was big. A lot of people I know who are not into Evel Knievel now, once they found out he was a horrible, horrible human being and
The book
anti-Semite.
gets into that too.
Yeah, but no, like he was. It's hard to explain Evel Knievel to people who didn't experience it, because I have now experienced it as a researcher and watched this great documentary called Being Evil. But he was huge. He was huge. I think he had his jump over the Snake River Canyon, which was a huge disaster. I think it was one of the first pay-per-view things that ever happened.
Really?
Yeah, in 1974. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. This is not a sport. This is not. I mean, neither is wearing swimsuits either, I guess. But at least you understand a little bit of that. Well, anyway. My point is just like this was this huge character in American life, and I've heard that people in Hollywood have been trying to figure out how to make a story of his life, which by the way they did in like 1971 with George Hamilton. Yeah. And then Knievel tried to star in a movie starring himself, Viva Knievel, which is a huge flop and one of the reasons why he starts spiraling out in my book and also in real life. But the idea of Evel Knievel was a fascinating one to me because he was this showman character that you could see why people loved him. Especially, adolescent boys, but also, young women or whatever. And he had a real charisma, and he shot from the hip, and he said what he felt, and he was a real self-made man in the sense that he was a thief from Butte, Montana, but they actually turned himself into this creature, and it was just a fascinating figure. The reason why Hollywood hasn't figured out how to make his movie is because he was a horrible human being.
Yes.
And there's no third act redemption. He didn't join a synagogue at the end of his, he didn't join the NAACP at the, no, he was, a wife-abusing bigot and a drunk, and that's how he died.
Who was undone by his own words that were taped by somebody who was part of his entourage.
Yeah,
right,
and this is also happens in 1977, and this is part of the plot of the book, is that there's this book, and this really happened, written by one of his PR guys who carried a tape recorder with him while they were promoting the Snake River Canyon jump in 1974, and he wrote a book about Evel Knievel with these quotes from tape, and Evel Knievel, he didn't like it, and he went to go find the guy, and that was...
He found him, didn't he?
Yeah, he found him, but that's the end of the book.
Keep reading.
But it's a true story.
Well, so something else that felt like a true story, perhaps more than it was, so, clarify this if I have this a little wrong here. And I'm ruining a little bit of a plot point, so I apologize, but you should read this. One of the ways in which Evel Knievel's massive ego is dealt with is by Ike being told he should talk about Evel Knievel running for president.
Yeah.
And what a great idea that would be.
And that...
Does that sound familiar at all to you?
Well, I did play with it a little bit, but you can find, and I just ordered on eBay an Evel Knievel for President button from that era. Now, I think it was kind of jokey and a stunt, but on Earth 2, Evel Knievel runs for president. I mean, it's not on Earth, where they invent the internet like 30 years before and he has a Twitter feed. Like, it's not really that hard to see how something like that could happen in the United States of America. It really isn't. I mean, Ronald Reagan obviously was a two-term governor, but he had been an actor. He had been well known for show business. Yeah. And Evel Knievel, it's funny, in the same way that Christina helped me by editing some of the stuff about Lucy to make her a more credible female character written in first person, I know nothing about motorcycles, absolutely nothing.
You would not know that from...
But motorcycles are a huge part of this book. And so I wrote the book, I wrote the first draft, and then I hate it, and I don't know how you feel, but I hate it when I'm watching a TV show or a movie about politics or journalism, and they just obviously have no idea what they're talking about. I'm just like, this.
Yes, it drives me crazy.
It just drives me. It's not that hard.
And it's often. It's
all
not,
the time.
Yeah.
Presidents
Yes.
don't introduce legislation. What are you doing?
The White House briefing room doesn't look like that.
Yeah, it's just like, it's not that,
on.
you know.
Right.
I mean, I don't just mean like nobody ever killed anybody in the Oval Office. Like we get that, that's a flight of fancy, but like get the legislation part right. So I didn't want anybody who rides a motorcycle to read my book and say, this is a book about motorcycles, and has not just Ike is a great motorcycle rider, Evel Knievel, obviously legendary, and then there are like some really significant action scenes that take place, real and fictitious, that have to do with motorcycle riding. Now, I didn't want to write it for a motorcycle geek. I wanted to write it for me and for you, so that it would be accessible, but I also wanted it to be accurate. So I found a guy named Mark Gardner, who is a motorcycle expert and writer. And I sent him the first draft, and I said, please help me so that people think I have any idea what I'm talking about. And he had great edits. And then after we had done our bit of business, and I paid him, and he has a credit in the acknowledgments of the book, he said, I thought you'd be interested in this. And he sent me an essay he had written that I had never seen before, where he is comparing Donald Trump to Evel Knievel. Like 2 or 3 years before, like it even, it occurred to me. And
oh, wait, this was was this in 2020, this piece?
It might have been, yeah.
Yeah, I think I read this piece when I was researching for.
And I'm just like, yes, that's not. I mean, he got there before me, but that's not his genius, and it's not my observation. It's just there. It's the connective tissue. It's right there. It's like when I was writing the first book, and Joe McCarthy was a big character, and then it doesn't. Joe McCarthy's protege was Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn's protege was Donald Trump. I mean, that's real. That's there. And so it doesn't, for Donald Trump to say or do things that are McCarthy-esque, that makes sense because they have that connective tissue. Now, obviously, I don't know if Donald Trump met Evel Knievel, and I resisted putting Donald Trump in the Studio 54 scene.
I noticed that. I was looking for him when I was reading it.
He was not Donald Trump. There's a Studio 54 scene because, I mean, of course. And
on a special night in New York City.
A special night in New York City. We won't tell you which one. And I didn't put Donald Trump in there because nobody would have known.
I wondered about that.
Lucy wouldn't have known who Donald Trump was. I mean, I thought about putting something in there about her noticing like but then I would have described him in such a way that wouldn't have
felt authentic.
Well, no, because he was a good-looking, handsome, thin dude back then. Like I could have. He really legitimately looked like Robert Redford, kind of. Like no. In 1970, people.
You were on the Upper East Side of
losing
Manhattan.
the crowd.
Thank you.
We can acknowledge. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to fight this.
Move on.
I'm going to take the L and move on.
Move on.
He doesn't look nothing like Robert Redford. He hasn't aged at all. He came out looking like that.
Put your tomatoes away. We have time for a few more questions before I turn to audience questions, and thank you, audience, for these. We've talked a lot about the tabloidization of news in the context of a specific tabloid owner, Murdoch.
Yeah.
But what we haven't talked about is the fact that, I don't know if you will agree with me on this, but I think much of news media has become tabloidized in one way or another.
Yeah.
And you and I both hear that criticism
Yep.
all the time. How much of that accounts for mistrust in media versus various mistakes media have made along the way over the last several decades? And what is the way out in the internet age?
It's such that we could talk for.
And when you solve that, just let me know. And I'll...
It is a philosophical discussion that we could, and I'm sure everybody here has an opinion as well, but it's something that we could talk about for weeks. I think I don't think it's the headline, the tabloidy headline that's the problem. It's when people click the link or read the story and they say, well, that's not what happened at all. At all. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the real disconnect. And that happens all the time. I experience that all the time, especially with certain websites. Mm-hmm. I don't experience it with the New York Times, and I don't experience it with CNN, but it does happen a lot, and a lot more than it should. Now, the other issue you talked about was mistakes. Mm-hmm. That's a big problem, and that's a big problem when people in the media, in the news media, need to be more careful, and we need to also
move slower. I think
go slower and own up to our mistakes, and that's still a lesson that I think a lot of us are learning, and I certainly include myself in that. I think another big problem is the push to make news media ideological, to have it preaching to the choir, because I think that that's dangerous. Because then, for instance, when Russiagate didn't turn into what people thought it would be, there was a whole bunch of disillusioned people, and a lot of people didn't even know why they were disillusioned or why they're upset. But a lot of people had, and again, I'm not belittling that there was obviously an effort by the Russians to interfere in the election, and that there was a lot of very fishy, suspect behavior by people on the Trump campaign. I'm not dismissing any of that, but some of the headlines and suggestions about what the Mueller investigation or before that the Comey investigation was going to result in did not come to pass, and there just wasn't the evidence to prove it. And I think that caused a lot of people, left, right, center, to be very disillusioned, and understandably so.
Can I offer one counterpoint on that?
Sure.
I think one of the issues in that time period was that there were also certain members of Congress who were pushing facts further than existed in that investigation on the Democrat side.
Yeah, 100%.
And that gets thrown into the melange of blaming the media. But don't we have an obligation to report on what they're saying as well?
Yeah. It's not. And by the way, it's not just the news media or certain members of Congress or the certain one member of Congress that I think you're talking about, but also but also the people in government agencies who were leaking and providing information. There was a lot of bad information or
partial information.
Yes, over-torqued information, I think is a better way to put it. But it's very important that we get back to a place where people can trust the media and can trust what I say on TV and what you say on TV and also write in the newspaper, because we really are the news media, and by extension, the people, pivotal to this experiment, the American experiment, working. I've been researching a guy named Benjamin Franklin Haysh. He was Benjamin Franklin's grandson. I want to write something about him. And he, after his beloved grandfather, Benjamin Franklin, passed in 1790, he took over this newspaper called the Aurora Advertiser. And he was not ruthless, he was fearless. He would criticize George Washington at a time that George Washington was revered. And for the right things, for how about those slaves, President Washington?
So there were no sacred cows?
Yeah, none.
Right.
And then he went after John Adams, and John Adams passed the Alien and Sedition Act, which made it a criminal offense to criticize the government, and threw him in prison. And we are just one Congress and one president away from that happening at any moment. And what you get if you don't have a Benjamin Franklin Haysh in the world is lies from the government that have no fear of being exposed.
But something that you get at in the book is that, a suspicion of government and dishonesty in government is not the province of one political party or the other.
No.
Although, certainly these days we are in a different world.
Right.
I'm going to turn to audience questions.
Okay.
There's some very good ones in here, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. This cues off something we were discussing backstage. And I think I know the answer. How would you change Twitter to make it better for public discourse, if at all?
Fewer Nazis would be good.
We said that, actually, backstage.
That's just in all things. How would you improve that dinner party? And it's just a general rule. I think that there are a lot of just fake accounts on Twitter, and there are these things called bot farms where you can hire a company, and I don't even know where they are. I heard that there are a bunch of them in India or whatever, where go after this person, and you give them whatever it is. I'm making it up at $10,000, and 200 fake people who have like 30 followers each, and the faces are not real, and and their names are like Mag 65321 6532, whatever.
Right.
And they can go after somebody, call them whatever they want to call them, get it trending, destroy that person. There had been, it seemed, a slight attempt, to get a control of that, and now it's just out the window, completely gone. And then there's no quality control there really at all, other than stuff that they could legitimately be sued for.
Right.
So that's one. Well, that's 1 and 2, Nazis and bots. That's good. That's a good place to start.
It works. Related to the tabloidization of the news, how did you feel about covering the submarine implosion around the clock while the refugee ship, and this is in Greece,
It's a good question.
It's a fair question.
Yeah, it is a legitimate question. I don't think that we covered it around the clock, but we covered it a lot, and I can try to explain why it is that the media, especially the TV media, covered that more than the refugee ship. And I want you to understand that I am completely sympathetic with the question. So this is not an excuse, but this is the true explanation. One of the things was going on right off the coast of Canada, and the other thing was going on in the Mediterranean. So it was much easier to get reporters and cameras and production and trucks and all that to Newfoundland than it was to Athens or wherever we would have done it. 2, and this is going to sound really callous, but if you talk to people in Europe, migrant ships, this is how it was, do not shoot the messenger on this, but this is how it was described to me. Migrant ships sinking in the Mediterranean are to Europe what mass shootings are to the United States. It's a horrible thing to say, but it happens a lot too often. It just doesn't get the kind of attention it does. 3, I don't excuse anything. In a perfect world, we would have covered the migrant ship 700 times more than we covered the submarine.
There are a lot of realities about Europe that are very different than the U.S.
The submarine was also a mystery, one that people were hoping for a happy ending on. And quite legitimately. And the fourth one is, all the bias and every reason that you think happens, which is people in the United States cover Canadians and Americans more than they cover other people. And, and the same is not necessarily true in other countries because the United States is the powerhouse we are. Right. But it's a conversation we had all the time on that week on my show with me in your role, whoever asked that question, with me, like, why aren't we doing this? This is not fair. This is, and here's the last one, and this is the one because the public always gets let off the hook, right?
So
the American people were fascinated by that story. They watched it and they were interested in it and they wanted to know more. And it wasn't just the morbidity of it. It was learning about the depths of the ocean. It was learning about submarines. Right. It was learning about this whole world of exploration that never gets any coverage. And so that's also part of it. That's a lot more about the submarine than I thought I would talk about tonight. But I've thought about it a lot because I'm very sympathetic to that questioner's question.
This is one I think you've been asked before, but in the interest of fairness, I do want to ask it, although I don't think that I would ask it a little differently if it was me, but was CNN aware that the town hall would be a Trump political event? This is the Caitlin Collins hosted town hall. I don't think that's a fair characterization, but I think that is the question.
I have been asked about this before, and I'll tell you my general questions that I would throw back at whoever asked the question. 1, Donald Trump is the Republican frontrunner for the nomination, by far. It's not even close as of now, July. If you think that town halls are a worthy use of airspace to have people get to ask questions of people running for president, with occasional follow-ups or fact checks by the anchor or the moderator, do you not do that for the Republican frontrunner? Now, I understand some people are going to say, you don't do it if it's Donald Trump because he is who he is. I get that. But on a philosophical level, do you really not do it for the Republican frontrunner? If you're going to then do it for Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie and everyone else. So that's one. If your answer is no, then there's nothing I can say to change your mind. And that is a decision that was made not by me, but by CNN bosses. And by the way, I think ultimately will be a decision that every news organization, every TV news organization will have to make. And my guess is that every one of them will do it except for MSNBC. That would be probably my guess.
Let me ask a follow-up to that. Because I've heard a lot of criticisms of the town hall as well, and I've had the same conversation of, the on the one hand, on the other hand. What lessons do you think, if any, apply? I actually don't personally think that there's much about 2016 coverage that's especially applicable now, because we're just in such a different era.
Yeah.
We're post January 6, 2021.
Right.
Things are very different. What do you think that the media gets right in how it approaches the former president at this point?
So,
sorry if that's not the question people wanted to ask.
I just want to do one more thing about the
please.
Audience, about the audience at the town hall, because it's an important point. The audience for the town hall was chosen. It was in New Hampshire, and it was Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. That is the same kind of audience that would be chosen if it were Joe Biden. It would be Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents. There wasn't an effort to go and find Trump supporters. If you pack a room full of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents in a purple state like New Hampshire, you're going to end up with a crowd, and many of the people in the crowd are going to like Donald Trump. So that's just something that's important to note. And the last thing I would say about that is the horror that so many people experienced when the crowd was cheering or applauding when Donald Trump was belittling E. Jean Carroll or insulting Caitlin Collins or whatever, any of the things. I think one question is, was the broadcast of that what bothered you, or were the existence of people, your fellow Americans, who are cheering Donald Trump, belittling a sexual assault survivor who just was awarded a $3 million settlement by a jury here, was that really what bothered you? And I understand it could be both, but these are big questions to ask. What do we get right?
Yeah, what's changed, especially post January 6, 2021?
Well, I can only speak for me because I'm really only in charge of my coverage. Sure. I think that it is important to recognize that Donald Trump is not, he is not like any other candidate. He is a candidate who is extremely reckless with his words and with his accusations.
And with his social media feed.
And that his words and actions have been causing violence for years and years before January 6th. I was on the list of people that Cesar Sayoc was going to send a pipe bomb to, so I take it very seriously. And that wasn't even Donald Trump coming after me. It was just like, the media and Democrats are evil, and this super fan decided he would. Look, just the other day, Donald Trump posted on his social media site a Phyllis Schlafly newsletter from 2017 that contained the home address for the Obamas, God knows why, and one of his super fans saw it and
showed up there
with a bunch of guns and ammo.
Yeah.
One thing I can say is, covering this guy live is a real risk.
And challenge, yeah.
And challenge.
Yeah.
But it might be very easy for individuals in the public to act and pretend that he is not the Republican frontrunner and this problem did not go away after January 6th. But we can't. We don't have that luxury.
Right.
One of the reasons that I write fiction, to turn away from things in the real world that I don't like and focus on another world where I'm able to comment on things that I see in a fantasy land based in historical reality.
I actually felt as I was reading the book like it was part of processing the current world we're living in. I'm going to end the final.
100%. All these books are ways of trying to understand today by looking at yesterday, whether it's Joe McCarthy or Frank Sinatra or Evel Knievel and the rise of the Murdochs. All of it is me grappling with today by trying to have fun. I mean, this conversation, because it's you and me, has turned serious. But the book really is, I hope,
it's a great book.
A fun and enjoyable read. It just deals with... I know, so I'm about to jump off a bridge.
No,
after this conversation.
These were serious questions that you all asked, and it was important to address them.
But wrestling with the idea of demagoguery in a fun, evocative way, without...
It is fun and evocative. It is
without
things.
They already bought the book. But without the dreariness of the reality. I think it is also important for people to understand that one of the things that's going on in the Republican Party right now is a whole bunch of people who are just absolutely convinced that there's no way Donald Trump can get elected president, based on the fact that all those people that moved against him or didn't vote in 2016 haven't shifted at all. And it's not like he's doing anything to win them over. I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating is the group of voters that I call double haters. They don't like either candidate. In 2016, double haters went for Trump over Hillary, I think by about 3-2 or something like that. But like Biden is winning them by like 50 points. I mean, Biden is, people who hate him are going to vote for Biden over Trump. So, I mean, there is this reality that... Let's hear it for people who hate Joe Biden. That's who you were clapping for. Anyway, that's just an important part of what's happening right now.
Let me ask you a final question, audience question.
I'm sorry, I was just joking.
No. I'm very glad you lightened the mood. Do you think that Joe Manchin will run for president as an independent?
No.
Audience question, not my question.
I mean, do I think that he harbors hopes and dreams that someday the Red Sea will part and he can walk in and be anointed president of no labels and whatever and then go right? Yeah, of course. There is not a senator who doesn't think that they could be a president. Literally, and probably most of the House at this point.
Did Charlie Martyr think he could be president?
Charlie Martyr drinks too much to be president, but Charlie Martyr would be
Is that a disqualifier?
I mean, maybe it should be a requirement. Charlie Martyr is he's a Rockefeller Republican, and he is a war hero in World War II, and he's a character that I've grown, he and his wife, Margaret, are characters that I've grown to have great affection for. And I do think that Charlie Martyr's kind of principled Rockefeller Republican. He's more of an Eisenhower Republican, really. I don't want to get involved in the Rockefeller laws. Don't start on that.
Wrong state.
Yeah. Okay, he was a Dewey Republican. But he's somebody he's fictitious, and I admire him very much.
He's fictitious.
As possibly the only politician I could admire very much would be fictitious.
He's fictitious, and I admire him very much is a great note to end on. I want to remind you guys that Jake's book is available for sale on the lobby. For those of you who I'm not sure actually got the book, please do read it. It's fantastic. We cannot thank you enough for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Great audience.
Thank you to the Y.
Thank you.